Let's start with the first step in detaching from people and situations, recognizing the emotional hooks. This is where most people get stuck, not because they lack strength, but because they're not fully aware of the silent emotional contracts they've signed. Every unhealthy attachment begins with an emotional trigger, a hook. These hooks aren't always obvious. They can look like love, but they're actually obligation. They can sound like loyalty, but they're really fear. They might feel like responsibility, but they're fueled by guilt. And until you see these hooks for what they are, you won't be able to pull yourself free, because a mind that is emotionally entangled will always justify its own imprisonment. Let's say you're dealing with a toxic person, someone who consistently disrespects your time, manipulates your emotions, or drains your energy, yet you keep going back. Why? It's not because you like being mistreated. It's because, somewhere along the line, you tied a part of your identity to how that person treats you. You made their behavior about your worth. You accepted a hook, and that hook is now inside your nervous system. Maybe they once gave you validation. Maybe you fear that if you walk away, you'll lose more than a person. You'll lose a piece of your identity. That's the power of emotional hooks. They make you believe you're safer holding on to pain than stepping into peace. They distort your logic by activating emotional memories often linked to early conditioning. You don't just see this person as who they are, you see them as who you hoped they'd be, and you can't detach from a version of them that never existed in the first place. You need to identify what you're really attached to. Is it their approval? Is it the fantasy of potential? Is it a desire to prove you're enough? Many times, the hook is a cycle of trying to be good enough for someone who will never see your value because they're too busy wrestling with their own voids. And the longer you stay in that cycle, the more your self-worth erodes. Here's what psychology tells us. Human beings are wired to seek connection. But not all connection is healthy. Some connections are trauma bonds, relationships built on cycles of pain, relief, hope, and disappointment. They feel intense, but they're not rooted in safety, and detaching from these bonds requires brutal honesty with yourself. You can't fix what you won't face, so face the hook. Ask yourself, what emotion keeps pulling me back? Is it fear of being alone? Is it guilt for wanting peace? Is it the anxiety that if I let go, I'll regret it later? Awareness is your greatest weapon here, because once you see the hook, you have a choice. You may not be able to change the other person or undo the past, but you can control what you continue to participate in. You can stop assigning someone else the power to regulate your emotions. And let's be real, some of us are hooked on chaos, not because we want to be, but because it's familiar. If you grew up around instability, toxicity can feel normal. Predictability might even feel boring. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to unlearn. You can't heal in the same environment that broke you, and you can't grow when you're constantly trying to fix someone else. Recognizing the hook also means recognizing when your energy shifts. Notice how you feel before, during, and after interactions. Do you feel drained? Do you feel tense, anxious, or unsettled? That's your nervous system signaling you. Stop silencing those signals in the name of being understanding or supportive. You are allowed to walk away from what drains you, even if no one else understands why. Also pay attention to how much space a person or situation takes up in your mind. If you're constantly replaying conversations, defending yourself in imaginary arguments, or feeling the need to prove your point, you're not in control. The hook has your mind, and the more mental real estate it consumes, the less space there is for peace, clarity, and confidence. The ultimate goal isn't to hate or resent the person. It's to neutralize your emotional reaction to them. Once you understand the hook, it loses power. Once you name it, I'm afraid of being rejected. I feel responsible for their emotions. I want to be chosen. You start separating yourself from it. And that separation is what gives you leverage to act differently. You don't owe anyone your constant accessibility, your emotional labor, or your peace. You are not a rehab center for broken people. You're not an emotional crutch for those who refuse to grow. And you're not obligated to stay somewhere just because you once cared deeply. Love and detachment can coexist. You can care and still choose yourself. You can have empathy and still walk away. This isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. You can't heal, lead, or grow if you're constantly bleeding energy into things you can't control. Recognizing the emotional hook is the first and most essential step toward freedom. Because once you see the chain, you can break it, and that's where your power begins. Most people misunderstand what boundaries truly are. They think setting a boundary means cutting someone off, blocking them, or walking away without explanation. That's not strength, that's escape. That's reaction, not response. True boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about protecting your energy while staying composed, clear, and in control. You don't set boundaries to punish others. You set boundaries to honor yourself. And that requires psychological clarity. Let's be real. If you're constantly feeling drained, anxious, or overwhelmed around certain people, that's not just a personality clash. That's a signal. It's your nervous system alerting you that something in this interaction is costing you too much. But many of us ignore those signals. Why? Because we were never taught how to create limits without feeling guilty. You might say yes when you mean no. You over-explain yourself when someone questions your choices. You agree to things you resent later. You show up for others at your own expense. That's not kindness. That's self-abandonment. And the more you do it, the more you train people to believe your needs are optional. Boundaries start with internal alignment. You need to know where you stand before you ask anyone else to respect it. That means getting clear on what you're willing to tolerate, what drains you, what triggers you, and what feels like betrayal to your own values. If you don't know your limits, others will define them for you, and when they do, you'll always feel off, balance, unsure, or resentful. One of the most powerful things you can say is, "That doesn't work for me." No anger. No explanation, just clarity. You don't need to defend your decisions when they are rooted in self-respect. The people who truly value you will respect your boundary. The ones who benefited from your lack of boundaries will challenge them. That reaction isn't your problem. It's their discomfort meeting your growth. Now here's where it gets strategic. Psychological boundaries are more than verbal statements. They are mental filters. You decide what to absorb and what to let go. Someone insults you, you don't internalize it. Someone tries to guilt you, you don't engage emotionally. Someone plays the victim, you stay grounded and refuse to take the bait. You control the emotional access others have to you. That's the real boundary. This is especially critical when dealing with manipulative, narcissistic, or emotionally immature individuals. These people test your boundaries, not because they misunderstand them, but because they benefit from crossing them. You don't defeat manipulation by arguing. You defeat it by not participating. When you stop reacting, you strip their control. Detachment begins when you stop giving people the reaction they're hoping for. Silence is a boundary. Not answering every text, not attending every argument you're invited to, not justifying your absence. These are silent declarations of self-worth. When you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people who disrespect you, that's when you've truly stepped into your power. But boundaries are not just about saying no to others. Sometimes they are about saying yes to yourself. Yes to rest, yes to not fixing everything, yes to letting people be disappointed in you. That's hard, especially if you were raised to believe your value came from how useful or agreeable you were. But pleasing is not generosity. It's fear dressed up as kindness, and it always comes with a cost, usually your peace, your time, and your self-worth. Another misconception is that once you set a boundary, people will just fall in line. That's not always true. Setting a boundary is step one. Enforcing it is where the real work begins. When someone disrespects your line, don't repeat yourself endlessly. Don't beg for understanding. Hold the line. You train people by how consistent you are. And here's a truth not many will say out loud. Some relationships won't survive your boundaries. Some people only stayed close because you had none. And when you finally stop overgiving, over-explaining, or overextending, they leave. Let them. The cost of keeping people around by shrinking yourself is far greater than the pain of losing them. Detachment requires boundaries because it's impossible to remain emotionally neutral if people can access you at any time, in any way, with any tone. Think of your emotional world like a secured facility. Not everyone gets a keycard. Not everyone gets access to every room. Some people, they don't even make it past the front gate. You get to decide who comes close. You get to decide how long they stay. You get to decide when to lock the door. Remember, boundaries aren't about control. They're about clarity. They tell people, this is who I am, this is what I allow, and this is how I expect to be treated. And once you start living from that place, you'll notice something powerful happen. Your anxiety goes down, your energy goes up, and your relationships get cleaner, healthier, and more honest. Because when you honor your boundaries, the right people stay, and the wrong ones naturally fall away. And that's not a loss, that's alignment. Detachment doesn't begin with cutting someone off. It begins with cutting off the story you keep repeating in your own mind. Most people don't realize this, but the strongest chains are the ones we build with our thoughts. What you say to yourself over and over again creates the emotional world you live in. And if you want to truly detach, you must take back control of the internal narrative. Here's the reality: people can hurt you once, but your mind can replay that pain 100 times. You keep revisiting the insult. You rehearse your responses. You analyze their behavior. You twist yourself into knots trying to figure out why they treated you the way they did, or how you could have changed the outcome. That mental loop becomes a prison, and the only way out is through self-discipline and thought. We have a biological tendency to scan for danger and remember pain. The human brain is hardwired for survival, not happiness. So when someone disrespects us, abandons us, or disappoints us, the brain keeps revisiting that moment, not because it enjoys it, but because it's trying to make sense of the threat. But here's the thing: emotional detachment requires you to stop trying to find logic in other people's dysfunction. You have to stop writing a script in your head that makes their behavior your fault. Because the longer you try to rationalize their actions, the more you take responsibility for things that were never yours to carry. This is why controlling the narrative is so powerful. It allows you to separate truth from emotion, and that separation is where freedom begins. Start by paying attention to the language you use in your own mind. Do you constantly say things like, maybe I wasn't enough, I should have done more, what if they're right about me? These phrases may feel harmless, but they're lethal over time. They feed your self-doubt. They reinforce emotional dependency, and they keep you hooked to people who were never capable of seeing your worth in the first place. Here's something I learned in interrogation: people reveal more by what they repeat than by what they say once. It's the same with your thoughts. What you keep thinking becomes what you start believing. So if the story you're telling yourself is based on pain, rejection, or comparison, that becomes your identity. You start seeing the world through that lens, and suddenly, you're not just dealing with what someone did to you. You're carrying the narrative of that damage into every future interaction. This is why emotional detachment requires mental editing. You have to reframe, not with blind positivity, but with accurate perception. When you feel your mind spiraling, pause, ask yourself, is this thought helping me move forward or keeping me stuck? Just because something feels true doesn't mean it is. Feelings are not facts, and you are not obligated to believe every thought your mind produces, especially the ones rooted in fear, insecurity, or shame. Reframing sounds simple, but it takes discipline. For example, instead of thinking, they didn't value me, you shift to, they were not capable of giving me what I deserve. One puts the blame on you, the other acknowledges their limitation. Or, when you find yourself obsessing over closure, reframe with, I don't need their apology to heal. I can give myself the truth they never offered. You see, when you stop letting your mind make excuses for other people's behavior, you gain clarity. And clarity is the antidote to emotional confusion, because once you know what's real, you stop chasing illusions. You stop begging for validation. You stop waiting for someone to fix what they broke. And let's talk about self-talk. The way you speak to yourself when no one is watching matters more than anything else. If your inner dialogue is harsh, critical, and unforgiving, it becomes very hard to detach, because deep down, you believe you deserve the treatment you're receiving. So you tolerate things you shouldn't. You normalize disrespect. You confuse struggle with love. Start speaking to yourself like someone worth protecting. That's not ego. That's alignment. When your internal world is rooted in truth and respect, the outer world starts reflecting that. You won't beg for attention anymore. You won't chase people who are inconsistent. You'll recognize when a situation doesn't match your peace, and you'll walk away without feeling guilty. And if the voice in your head is not your own, if it sounds like a parent who was never satisfied, a partner who tore you down, or a friend who always made you question yourself, it's time to rewrite it. You are allowed to fire the voices that don't support your growth. You are allowed to replace them with words that build, not break. Detachment is not just silence. It's not blocking or deleting someone and then spending the next 6 months thinking about them every day. That's not freedom, that's emotional obsession. True detachment is when you take your power back from the stories that held you hostage. It's when you say, I remember, but I no longer react. That's control. That's discipline. That's peace. So the next time your mind pulls you back into old narratives, pause, breathe, remind yourself, you are not what happened to you. You are not what they said about you. And you are not here to live inside someone else's version of your worth. Emotional reactivity is one of the fastest ways we lose power. Someone says something insulting, and we lash out. Someone ignores us, and we over-explain. Someone triggers our insecurity, and we either shut down or spiral. That's not strength, that's surrender, not to the person, but to the emotion. And as long as you're reacting, you're not leading. You're following the emotional tempo someone else set for you. To detach from people and situations that destabilize you, you have to train yourself to respond strategically, not emotionally. You can't control how other people act, but you can absolutely control how you show up. And that's where your leverage begins. Think of high-level professionals, Secret Service agents, crisis negotiators, intelligence operatives. When things go wrong, they don't scream, panic, or lose their composure. They go quiet, they assess, they decide what outcome they want, then they act, decisively, cleanly, and with full control of their emotions. Why? Because once you react emotionally, you've lost your tactical edge. This is the same in life. You have to know the difference between impulse and intention. Reactivity is impulse, it's triggered by ego, fear, or pain. Strategy is intention. It's based on outcomes, awareness, and timing. Most people react because they need to be heard or validated in the moment. But strategic people, they're playing a longer game. They ask themselves, if I respond like this, will it help me or hurt me? And if it won't help, they don't take the bait. The truth is, a lot of people want you to react. Why? Because your emotional reaction gives them control. It validates their behavior. It keeps you entangled. But when you stop reacting, when you sit in silence and choose a different move, you shift the dynamic. You're no longer on defense. You've just taken the lead. That's what detachment looks like in action. It's not passivity. It's choosing your response with precision. You don't need to yell to prove your strength. You don't need to defend yourself to feel seen. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response, not out of spite, but out of discipline, because you've learned to hold your energy like it's currency. You don't spend it where it won't return value. And this isn't about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally intelligent. Emotional intelligence is not about suppressing what you feel, it's about knowing when and how to express it. Reactivity is blurting something out because you're hurt. Strategy is pausing, processing, and choosing the time, tone, and context that will have the most impact. The goal is never to win the moment. The goal is to win your peace. Here's something to consider. Every time you react, you're giving someone access to your nervous system. You're telling them, you can control how I feel, how I think, how I respond. That's not power. That's vulnerability in the wrong hands. So what does strategic detachment look like practically? It looks like staying quiet when someone is baiting you into a fight, because you understand their need for control doesn't require your participation. It looks like walking away from an argument that's going nowhere, because you know your peace isn't up for debate. It looks like not responding to texts that are clearly designed to provoke you, because you've outgrown the need to defend yourself in spaces that refuse to see you clearly. It also means preparing yourself before situations happen. Anticipation is a tactical skill. If you know a conversation is likely to turn manipulative, plan your responses. If you know someone tends to twist your words, document what matters. If you know a place or person tends to make you feel small, limit exposure, or better yet, remove access entirely. When you shift from reaction to strategy, you change how people experience you. You become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, harder to break, and not because you don't feel anything, but because you've mastered the art of not letting those feelings run the show. One of the most dangerous lies people believe is that reacting proves you care. It doesn't. Reacting proves you're still tied to the outcome emotionally, but responding with intention, that proves you care about your growth, that proves you care about your peace, and when peace becomes the priority, everything changes. Detachment isn't cold, it's calculated. You don't detach because you stopped loving, hoping, or caring. You detach because you've finally realized that giving someone else the power to trigger you is a cost you're no longer willing to pay. You choose to observe without absorbing. You decide to protect your energy, not because you're cruel, but because you've learned what happens when you don't. Reactivity might feel good in the moment, but it's expensive. It costs you clarity, it costs you time, and worst of all, it keeps you connected to chaos. Strategy, on the other hand, gives you space. It allows you to choose actions that align with your future, not reactions that are tied to your past. You don't need to win arguments. You don't need to prove you're right. You don't even need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You just need to know who you are, what you stand for, and what you're no longer available for. Because when you stop reacting, you start rising. And nothing is more powerful than someone who is emotionally unshakable, calm, clear, and completely in command of their own energy.